Right now, I have the privilege of getting to introduce this gentleman that has been sharing our rich Choctaw culture through the art of storytelling to people all across this world. And right now, I'd like for you to welcome Mr. Tim Tingle.
It's always a very moving experience for all of us to be here. We're here representing our families, representing our friends, and we're also here representing our kinfolks who survived the Trail of Tears. My great-grandfather was 10 years old. He woke up in the morning. According to my Uncle Kenneth, he would always tell us the story, sitting in the backyard of my grandmother's house. His house was burning down. He leapt up out of bed. He fled outside the front door, and his mother grabbed him and pulled him close and said, "We're sorry we wouldn't have left you. We thought you ran out the back door. We wouldn't have left you inside the house." And his father, according to my uncle, his father saw the neighbors next door. He said, "Go next door, see if they can help put our fire out." And so John and his big brother ran next door, but the neighbors were sound asleep, but they saw that their house was burning too, and they woke them up. And they stood in the streets, and then his father said, "Look." And from the woods and the river behind the house and behind their garden, behind their farms, their cornfields, they saw men riding on horseback. And as Kenneth reported that little John said, he was 10 years old, he said, "It was beautiful, it was beautiful." The men leapt from the horses and they ran and they flung torches. It was like watching spinning, beautiful, spinning, fiery stars come down from the sky. And then you realize what was happening. They hit the roofs of the houses and they went up in flames. Until we were there gathered in the street. It was a town. We live in towns. We lived in towns. And John was only 10 years old. But it's always said of John that even though he was only 10, sometimes he spoke in such a quiet way that people would listen to him. He was only 10. And he wasn't a proud little 10-year-old boy, but sometimes he would stand and look at something and say something, and everyone would just look at it and look at him and look at things a little differently. And everyone was gathering in the streets, and the homes were burning, and everyone was running. And from the horses, the men leapt, and they fired shotguns. And then John said, "Dad, it's going to be okay." And his father said, "It's going to be okay if we can make it to the woods." And if they, "No, Dad, look. And he pointed to the church, about a block away, to the church. And light was shining down from the tower, the bell tower of the old church. Light was shining down. And John said, "Dad, look, I don't know, but we'll wake up in the morning and all the bad and burning and everything will be gone. And the light is shining. I don't know if it's the return of Jesus or angels, but look." And his father stopped and he said, "We should," and he pulled everyone back into the bushes on the side of the road and into the trees, and they looked, and the light shone, and the light shone, and the light shone, and the light showed us how strong our faith would have to be. Because the light was not the light of Jesus or the light of angels. It was the light of a man who had leapt from his horse in front of the church and was climbing the church tower with a torch. And as the light grew brighter and brighter and the light shone upon the faith we must have, stronger than we ever knew, he leaned out and flung the torch on the roof of the church. And when the church began to burn down, John said to his father, "What about the books, the hymn books, the song books?" And his father said, "We will worry about the books later. We need to survive." And for my family, this is how the Trail of Tears began. This is how my uncle told us how it began for my family. But in the Choctaw way, hope shines stronger than darkness. And the hope came from those books. Because the first book ever written in the Choctaw language was a hymn book. The first book ever written in our language. Missionaries from the Methodist Church came down to learn our language and with elder Choctaws create a written language. And from those hymns emerged what is now our Choctaw national song. And it's said that they sang that song in the mornings as they walked the long walk with no shoes and over 500 miles and sometimes the depths of winter. And that song and faith and the power to forgive, it's always been part of who we are. And now we come back to the capital of this great nation, knowing you cannot blame a people for the actions of a few. It's time to forgive. Because we share a same beautiful song with so many thousands and millions of others. It's the song we sang every morning as we walked, and it's a song that many people say helped us to survive. I'll sing it as best I can in Choctaw. I don't have the voice of the singers, but I have the voice of an old man, and maybe some of you can identify with that. You'll know the song by the tune of it, if not the words. Many of you will. Shilong bish holy to ba ma ish me the bu la cha hata kilba shapi ya ishpi yokpa laski. You may quietly clap if you like. There is hope, there is forgiveness, there is humor in the lives of Choctaws. The humor that doesn't ignore it, but the humor that helps you get through it. We need it. And my storytelling mentor, as I mentioned him earlier, Charlie Jones, a wonderful man. I want to share a story that he told me that I maybe have only told maybe once in the last 20 years and never here. Never have I told it here. But I love this story. It's an old Choctaw story, one of the old ones. Long ago, old Charlie would say, long ago, yeah. This was long ago. I'm talking so really long ago. And there was a drought. It was hard times for Choctaws in. you know, we depended on hunting and growing a little bit, but you had to have some kind of hunting for the meat. And it was long ago, and there was a drought. Everything was kind of drying up, and there wasn't no water really. And so people were getting skinny, and they knew they're not going to be able to survive the winter. That drought, it wasn't a drop of water in the river, and people was having a hard time. They was having to gather whatever kind of plants might have some kind of juice or something in them. It was hard. But then these two little boys, they decided, we can't watch our grown-ups have all the hard time. Let's go figure out something. Let's go find some water. And they talked to each other about it. Now, they weren't proud little boys, but they just wanted to help out. So we don't want to be warriors or nothing. We just want to figure out a way to to make people alive. So they told their mom and dad they was going to go, and their mom said, there's no way you kids can do something. And their dad said, this is not going to happen. You kids aren't going to go off like this. And then they told the uncle. And the uncle said, what makes you think you can do this? And they said, we're just hoping and praying we could do it. That's all. And the uncle said, then go with my blessing. And he told the parents, the boys will be safe. And so the boys, they trailed down the river that was all dried up, and they kept trailing down, and they didn't see any kind of water at all. And finally, day after day, and they picked everything they could from it, and finally, it was so dry there wasn't even anything to eat, and there weren't any animals. They'd all run to where there was water. And these boys, it was late night. They knew that they couldn't survive maybe just a few more days without nothing to eat. And then they had their blow dart guns. One of them had a blow dart gun, one of them had a bow and arrow. And the young one, he'd been trying to shoot with a blow dart gun for a long time, and everybody made fun of him. He didn't know how to use that blow dart gun. They made fun of him, but the one that was a little bit older, he said, we keep our eyes open, and sure enough, here come a hawk. And that hawk come down close enough, and in the moonlight, back and forth, they could see that hawk, and their tummies were still growling, but they could see that hawk. And then that boy said, go ahead, you can get it with your blow dart gun. And he said, you know I can't shoot the blow dart gun. They're always making fun of me. He said, you can do it. Give it a try. Okay. And he put his blow dart gun up, and he put the little dart in it. And the boy that's a little bit older, he kind of hid behind the bush with his bow and arrow. And when that boy went, shoo, and shot that blow dart up there, it was twisting and turning and twisting and turning. And, of course, it didn't hit the hawk. I mean, of course. But the boy with the bow and arrow, shoo, he shot that arrow, and it hit the hawk. And it came down and fell, and he ran, grabbed his arrow, said, look at it. I don't see where your dart is, but you got it. And the kid said, wow. So that older boy, instead of being proud, was willing to help the younger boy gain his confidence. And they plucked the feathers, and they built a little fire, and they cooked that hawk, and they divided it up evenly. And, of course, the older boy gave a little bit more to the younger, and they took their first bite out of the cooked hawk, and then they say, what happened changed us forever as a people, because it was as if a light just glowed and glowed from high in the sky, and the light seemed to circle and turn, and then it finally landed, and the boys had put the hawks down and just looked at each other and looked, and they couldn't believe what they saw. It was a woman. And later, when they tried to describe her, one of the boys would say, she was so beautiful. Did you see her eyes? Her eyes were, what color were her eyes? Oh, I'll never forget. And yeah, and they couldn't describe her. But as she sat there, the boys looked at her and looked at the meat and listened to their growling tummies. And the boys said at the same time, we've cooked for you. You're our guest. And they picked up a wing of the hawk and they handed it to her. And she smiled. And she picked up the rest of the hawk and ate it all. And then looked to the starving boys to see how they would respond. And they looked at each other and they nodded. And the young boy said, "You are our guest. We're happy that you have enough to eat." And she nodded. And then she stood to go, and she turned away, and she waited for a moment, as if she was waiting for the boys to say their true feelings. They already had. And when she realized that, she turned back to the boys and she said, "You have given to someone you didn't even know when you were so hungry." And they said, "It was the right thing to do. You were our guest." And she said, "People like yours, you deserve the gift. And if you bring your people back 1 year from today on that hilltop, there will be a gift for you." And she left. And then she reappeared just briefly and she said, "When you get home, there will be just enough water, just enough animals in the woods, just enough crops growing. You can survive that year. Not prosper, but survive. But when a year is up, bring your people for the gift." They made their way back home, and even before they were halfway home, the trickle of water began, and they drank, and there were berries, and they ate. And when they arrived home, people were down and gathering water. And slowly the plants began to grow, and a few small animals began to return. And slowly the year passed. And the boys told their story, and people laughed at them and made fun of them. And when the boys said, "Yeah, and I hit the hawk with the blow dart gun," they said, "Oh, yeah, like you could hit no." And everybody said no. And when the year was up and they had counted the days, and they told their mother and father, "We need to leave tomorrow morning. We need to be on our way. We need to go." And their mother and their father said no. But when their uncle arrived, he said, "I will go with you boys, even if it's only us." And when their father and their mother heard this, they said, "Yes, yes, we will go." And when people in town heard this, they all decided to go, most of them to mock and ridicule the boys when they saw their idea was so wrong and silly. But regardless of the reason, they all went. And when they arrived at the place where the stones were still there from the cooking of the hawk, they stayed there, and the night settled, and they looked around, and there was nothing. And then the young boy remembered. He said, "The top of the hill." That's where she said. And they climbed to the top of the hill, and there was nothing. And then the moon came out from the clouds, and they saw nothing but stalks, just brittle stalks. And men went over and said, "Oh, what a wonderful gift." And they broke some of the stalks, and they said, "What is this? Sticking out like what would today be considered tiny little baseball bats." And they said, "Look at this." And it's covered with, "What is this?" And they peeled thick grass from the stalks. And they said, "Look at this. It's covered with bristly, brown, hairy junk." And they threw it to the ground. But the women said, "Maybe it is a gift." And so they walked up and they picked up the hairy, bristly, stalk things, and they cleaned them up in the river. And they boiled the first corn. She had given us the gift of tonchi, the gift of corn. And even today, corn is our most special food. Tonchi. We make it in breads, we make it in soups, we make it in puddings. We love our corn. The corn came to us as a gift in response to the generosity of two young boys. There is so much of who we are in that story of the uncle who listened, and of the men who saw the stobs of Harry nothing, but of the women who saw the gift for what it was. The women. We honor our women for their wisdom, for their leadership, for the quiet way they keep us who we are. Shalom is holy. If you like to sing it in your language, you can. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Are you ready? Shalom is holy, though Pama is me tipu lacha hata kiba shapia ispi yoga laski yakoki.
Well, thank you, Tim. We appreciate that.